pick a spot, cut, go. So I always just hit record right at the beginning because sometimes we get talking about something interesting and then we miss it. So,
well, first of all, I am very sorry to hear about the death in your family, and I also understand congratulations are in order because I guess you recently became a dad again.
Again, yeah, number 4. So we've got a 8-week-old baby, and my mom passed on, what day would that have been? Like the 3rd?
Well,
I don't remember. Something. Yeah, it's all kind of a blur now, but yeah, it was a week. It was the Saturday right after ICCFA, and it was expected though.
Yeah. Well, that has to be a whirlwind of emotions, and I can only imagine. So, my heart goes out to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a wild year. I mean, I was in Vegas for the Memorial Classic, and came home for a day before ICCFA kicked off, and the timing was perfect. Like my wife had already scheduled to go take dinner over to my parents, so we got to get over there one last time. And she'd been sick for a few years, dementia, just terrible. Broke her hip a year ago, so really has just been in really bad health. So it was a soft landing. She's 78, just too young, but it's still loss is a loss. But it's crazy thing is my brother's wife's mom also passed, but she got killed in a car accident. And so that was, you just kind of saw, and it was literally the funeral for my mom was Friday. The funeral for her mom was Saturday, and Mother's Day weekend, just really kind of crazy, but you kind of saw both like that 3-year kind of letdown and then just like the instant tragedy. So, yeah, so it was rough with my mom, but I would take that over unexpected, obviously. So, and what your kids are coming home from school? How old are your kids?
I have 3 kids. One is in daycare, so gets to stay a little longer. I have a 9-year-old, he's a boy, and then I have a 5-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. So we started late, and we're done. 3 is plenty.
Yeah. Oh, we're the same. I mean, started a little late, but yeah, ended up with 4. But they're all small as well. It's crazy.
Yeah,
that's exciting. And you got a lot of cool things going on in your life as well. So I think this is great timing to get a chance to talk with you. You've been, I know you've been a really powerful voice in death care for a long time. Our purpose here with PodCasket is just to tell the stories of the legends in death care. You're considered one of those for sure to me. I had been reading your content and seeing your name for a long time, I think before we ever spoke. So, yeah, really, really cool. But before we kick it off of asking you questions, I like to throw a little bit of a curveball random question that you're not maybe expecting. And so it's kind of 2 parts. This is food related. Where's the best burger? And because of where you live, I think I also need to ask you, like, where do you get the best cheesesteak?
Jeez, the best cheesecake. I mean, there's a
cheesesteak.
Cheesesteak. Yeah, there's a pizza place near me called Emilio's that they have, good pizza, good cheesesteak. So I usually go there. It's right in Manchester.
Okay.
And I'm not nearly as of course, probably one of the most famous foodies in all of funeral service has to be my boss, Welton Hong. And I am, I'm just sort of like a working class guy. To me, going out to a restaurant means going out to Olive Garden and, having something pretty simple, or, Applebee's Fridays. So it's always amazing to me if I join him for dinner. He's much more exciting than me. I start eating things that I've never even heard of, and I don't even know what they are. So I don't live so exotically normally. I'm like, sort of a takeout pizza Chinese guy. Burgers, fries, stay at home and eat. But it's always exciting to join him for dinner.
Yeah. I'm similar to you. It's like been a cultural thing for me and for Tukio's since the beginning. It's just, we find like the dives. It's probably the places that Welton would never dream of eating at. Like you're usually in like a rougher neighborhood, but yeah, Welton's got Well, I mean, I'm always just blown away by when he posts something about food where he's been. He always finds that seems like the nicest place.
Yeah, he certainly, I tell you, he treats his employees and his guests very well when he goes out to dinner because he always picks up the tab and I'm thinking, geez, Welton just spent on this dinner what I would probably pay for a decent used car. But that's just the way he is. He gets a lot of enjoyment out of life and he likes to definitely eat good food and drink fine wine.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, well, we're going to want to get to obviously your role at Ring Ring and everything you're doing with Funeral Vision. But before we get to that, let's kind of start from the beginning. If you wouldn't mind telling us about your upbringing, where you're from, and your school years, kind of time period, and all that,
Yeah,
growing up with your family.
Yeah, I grew up in Connecticut, Eastern Connecticut. If you're familiar with the Foxwoods casinos and the Mohegan Sun, that was pretty much in my backyard. Um, I didn't really have, really close family growing up. And, the one thing I really knew how to do and knew that I was interested in was writing. I had really no talent for math, but all my teachers encouraged me to sort of get into writing and follow that track. And, the College of New Jersey, formerly called Trenton State, had a really good journalism program, and so nothing was really keeping me home. I think sort of family problems and whatnot, so it was sort of good just to get out and get out of state. And I went to college and established in-state residency to have a cheaper tuition. I basically went to school and never went back home. Was on my own since going to school, and largely paid my way through college. My mom helped me and did what she could, but it was pretty much sink or swim, and have been in New Jersey ever since. Leaving home to go to college and made my career, as a writer and in communications, and particularly, have found a passion for funeral service.
How did you fund your way through college? You're paying your way. What were you doing then for income?
Oh my goodness. I was one of those kids working like 3 jobs in school. I remember during the summers, there was some weeks where I was cracking 100 hours a week. And so I didn't have a car that first couple of years when I was in school. I first got a job at a Dunkin' Donuts, and I was like walking. I don't know. Must have been like, I had to walk like 30 minutes to work, just walking, and I rented a room in a house. And eventually, through my journalism professor, I ended up landing an interview at 2 places at the same time. Bristol Myers Squibb, a pharmaceutical giant, and the Times of Trenton, which was a newspaper. I ended up getting both job offers, and I took both jobs. and I think I was still working at Dunkin' Donuts on the side. The Trenton Times was an interesting story. I got the job interview, and I didn't have a car at the time, so I had a friend drop me off at the interview, and was waiting in the parking lot. And I go up and I interviewed for the job with a great guy who has since left us, called Peter Callis. His name was Peter Callis, and it was funny because at the end of the interview, he asked me, "Well, when can you start?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I can start as soon as possible." Thinking he's going to say next week or 2 weeks from now or whatnot, and thinking I'm going to figure out the car thing later. And then he put me to work right after the interview, at the obituary desk of all
Oh,
things.
no way.
That's where I got my start. But
Wow.
I was so nervous at that point about not getting the job if he realized I didn't have a car. And this was before cell phones and all that. And I had to badge in to get into the building and go through security and all that. That I just left my friend hanging there in the parking lot. And, because there was no way to duck out and say like, "Hey, I got to tell my friend who's waiting in the parking lot, that I'm staying here." So I think he eventually just sort of got, I guess he just gave up after a few hours and left. I think I ended up doing like a 5-hour shift immediately after that interview. And I ended up walking home. I think I had to walk like 2 hours through Trenton, which is not like the safest city, and I think it was dark at that point. It's it's all like a distant memory now, but that's how I got my start in news. After that eventful interview at the Trenton Times, and I started on the obituary desk. You're going back like more than 20 years ago. That's how I got my start, and so it's funny that as a journalist and communicator, I really started in funeral service. Because I started on the obit desk, and there's been lots of changes with obituaries, so I've been with that through the very beginning. When I started, all the obits were free. You got faxed. That was how they came in. They were faxed, sometimes in hard to read handwriting,
Oh,
and
wow.
sometimes on like smudged faxes, and they were all free. No one paid for them, and then of course I stayed on as they started becoming more a paid model. And then from there, I just started doing different beats as a newspaper reporter. Police beat, which again, resulted in some interaction with funeral homes, because sometimes I was covering car accidents, funerals. I was a reporter in the aftermath of the September 11th terrorist attacks, and of course,
Oh my gosh.
being in New Jersey, that had, there was a lot of stories, because some people commuted to New York City, and some of the flights, were involved Newark Airport. That I've always sort of been close to that death angle, and building those relationships with funeral directors and funeral homes, right from the very beginning, even when I wasn't covering funeral service per se.
Okay, yeah, man, I've got a couple questions for you. Let's rewind to the obit desk for a minute, because I'm curious, like, what did that look like then in terms of handwriting? That's crazy. So you had to transcribe like obits coming in, but like, was there a team back then of people at an obit desk?
No, there was I remember on a busy night, I would go in at like, I don't know, say 3 o'clock, and you'd try to get all the obituaries typed in by 8 o'clock. So in 4 hours, you were getting all these obituaries. Some of them were typed, but some of them were also like a form that they just scrawled their handwriting on, and you sometimes had to decipher the handwriting, and try to get all the facts right and everything. Um, so I would type them in. They would go to an editor who would just give them a back read, and that was pretty much it. It was really just me and then one editor, sort of reviewing my work. You'd have to put them all into a certain style, right? Like,
Yeah,
because they were not paid at that point. Now I think they just run them as they come in, because you're paying for them. It's treated more as like an advertisement. But when I started, for instance, you would include sisters, brothers, but if someone started listing great nieces and great nephews, and all sorts of distant relatives, you would cut those folks out.
you would just cut those out.
Um,
What if they wrote like a longer kind of life history in it? Did you limit the number of paragraphs and lines?
yeah, you would put in certain things, but again, you would edit out some things if they were just, if it was just going on and on. You would cut it off at a certain point. So, there was some basic information you would definitely include if they were a veteran, if they served in a war, church memberships, obviously service details, but you
Hmm.
would have it like a cookie cutter type style that you would definitely use your judgment in terms of what went in and what was excluded.
What about photos back then? Would you put a photo in the,
Yep,
did they print with the
you would
photo?
run a headshot. You would run a headshot.
And they
If they
fax that
include,
in too?
those would come in via email usually. Yeah. So
Oh,
yeah, but you
interesting.
would you would run a headshot if they included it. Sometimes they would actually drop them off. They were local, and they would just drop off the material, and some receptionist would walk it up to you.
Yeah. Was that a locally owned newspaper at the time, or was it part of one of the big groups?
It was part of the Newhouse family, which was a pretty decent sized newspaper. They owned different newspapers.
Okay. So you're like police beating that. Was that when you were on as a writer? Were you out on the streets, like kind of like you see like reporters in the movies?
Yes, yes, I had a police scanner at my desk, right? So, if I heard a big fire or, even if it was like a shooting or a stabbing, I mean, just a picture of me like a, 20-year-old kid or something running out and I would work the night shift running out at like 10:30 at night in the inner city, because I heard about a shooting, right? So it was a
Wow.
somewhat, at times, it could be a dangerous job. Um, you know, especially, sometimes there was a racial element too, because, it was a largely black city. And, sometimes you would go out and, sometimes people would not take too kindly to seeing you out there and say like, oh, you only come out here when there's bad news to report or whatnot. But I was just doing my job covering the police beat. So those were some interesting dynamics to navigate, and
Yeah.
could get a little dicey at times.
Wow. No, that's super cool. So where did you go from there?
Well, from there, I actually did a stint as a high school teacher for, I double majored in history and journalism. And so, I tried teaching mainly because I thought like, hey, that's a secure job, get the summers off, that kind of thing. But I really knew after just a year of doing that my heart was more on the writing side and the communication side. Um, didn't really have a lot of patience for that classroom management and dealing with all of that. It was just, it just got to me, and I decided like, hey, let me, I finished out my year as a teacher. I knew I didn't want to leave anyone hanging and leave middle of the year, but I finished out my year doing that, and just followed my passion of writing and communicating, and have been doing that ever since.
Wow. That's and then, so from was the next job then Kate's Boylston or what?
No, the next job I worked at Bloomberg, which was great. When they were in Princeton, and got a lot of training on like understanding earnings reports, financials, a balance sheet, all of that. And that was great. I enjoyed that job, but then they were relocating me to New York City, and the cost dynamics of living in New York changed things quite a bit for me. And so I wasn't sure what to do at that point. I was looking at apartments like in Jersey City and New York, and I was shocked by how much they cost. And at the same time, I was sending out resumes, unsure of what I was going to do, right? Like unsure if I was going to move and live in New York or if I was going to get a job somewhere else. I ended up getting a job at the Asbury Park Press, which is a pretty well-known newspaper in New Jersey. And I did the copy desk, and was on their night shift working there. But it was an irregular schedule, right? I was working like 4 p.m. to 1 or 2 in the morning. I was working weekends, and it didn't really give me a chance for much of a social life or anything along those lines. So while I loved the job, I also saw the trajectory of newspapers being somewhat in decline. And so, when I saw an advertisement for a trade publication that published death care magazines that offered a bit more of a stable schedule and like a Monday through Friday type thing, I just thought, hey, why not? Let me apply to this. And I applied to that job, and I think I sort of harassed them until I got an interview. I was just really like calling and checking up. Like, hey, did you get my application? And I got the interview, got the job, and stayed at Case Boylston for 15 years. Was there for 2 or 3 years after they actually sold the company to a new owner, and just loved the work. Made a lot of connections, made a lot of friends, and was just really amazed by how much the death care profession just embraced me. Really just sort of accepted me into the family after a few years, and just have always loved business reporting, and at the end of the day, that's really what funeral service is. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, right? I mean, and so I think the owners and the operators appreciated the approach I brought to the table, sort of looking at it as a business and trying to help them navigate business challenges. And of course, for me, I just have the utmost respect for, what our customers do on a day in and day out basis, helping families through the hardest time of their lives, and all while raising families of their own and trying to make a living, and navigate those daily challenges while being there for families. It's just something I really just respect what they do, and try to do my really small part in giving them information they need, providing them with business insights. And so that's how I approached my job at Cates Boylston when I was there, and I've sort of continued that on in my role as the founder of funeralvision.com, and now with Ring Ring Marketing. I'm still just trying to add value and help owners operate and navigate business challenges.
Yeah, and with Cates Boylston, was it headquartered in New Jersey? Was there like an office you went into?
So we were owned, for the bulk of the time when I was there, we were owned by a company in Gaithersburg, Maryland called United Communications Group, which owned all different information companies. We were just like a small unit of an overall company. And our offices were in New Jersey. I'd occasionally go to Maryland and, check in with the higher ups, or have some kind of, team building retreat or something like that. But, so that's how it was for the bulk of my time there.
Yeah. Were you, did you meet Anthony Kaniak there, or did you guys know each other before?
Yeah. Anthony, who is now, with the NFDA, I worked with him for a good 10 years. And I also worked with Ed, who is the editor-in-chief there. I worked with him at Cates Boylston. So it's funny how, while our paths have diverged somewhat, we're all still in funeral service. We all stay in touch here and there and run into each other, and, have nothing but good things to say about them. They were great colleagues, and, good to stay in touch with them.
Yeah, no, they're great guys. Anthony's really funny. Ed, he puts together, doesn't Ed put together that like video once a year? It's kind of like what happened in funeral service, kind of like satire a little bit too.
Yeah, he's got a cool sense of humor, and I know if you know Ed, I know he's a huge Bruce Springsteen fan and Red Sox fan and Warren Zevon fan. So he's an interesting guy.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. You guys got to all work together there. Backing up just a little bit, I'd love to hear your thoughts. These are some discussions I've had recently with customers, and just in talking with a couple of newspapers. I'd love to hear your thoughts on like obits and newspaper and distribution. And what I mean, kind of specifically, is I think the behavior used to be you would open the newspaper to find out who died, right? That was like you'd open the obit section, not already knowing anyone that's really, or not knowing what you're going to find. And like you mentioned, obits used to be free. And so it seems like in some ways now newspapers have priced themselves out of a product. And you're seeing, and this is, just recent on my mind because I just did this obituary for my mom and put it in the newspaper, and just kind of seeing the pricing and how that all works and the deadlines, and just like it's a kind of a hectic thing to try to get it in place. But then, being kind of a tech guy and wanting to like kind of track what's effective, it seems to me, and this is where I'd like your opinion, that like there's still this mechanism of announcing an obituary that a newspaper can do a really good job of, or some sort of distribution there, aside from just the idea of like, we host websites. We like people going to websites and looking at obituaries on websites for funeral homes. So I'm not trying to get away from, like, that's obviously crucial to us. But I'm also like working with my mom's obit, realizing like if you just put it there, had I just put it there and not posted it to social media and put it in the newspaper, the majority of the traffic the obit got wouldn't have happened. And also, I was blown away by the number of people that came to the viewing and the funeral that said, saw it in the newspaper, or I saw your Facebook post, which I hadn't posted on Facebook in 13 years. I don't really do social media personally, but so yeah, just curious, like what your thoughts are on like, do you think there's a way that newspapers can kind of bring that back, fix that? Is there a replacement? Is it social media? Like what needs to be done for distribution, do you think, in obits?
Yeah, I think you hit the key is that today newspapers really is just one channel, and it used to be the primary channel or the only channel. It's almost like if you're marketing your business these days, right? Like you have to you repackage your message and you put it on this social network and this social network, and you might have a podcast, you might have an email newsletter that goes out to clients. You might do billboard advertising or bench advertising and all these different things, right? Like you don't just put it in one place. And it used to be with obituaries, you could rely on the newspaper as really being the primary or the only channel where you delivered something. And now I don't think there is a way to get that back. I don't know about your community, but in my community, a lot of newspapers have discontinued their print edition and now are strictly an online publication. So you don't have that print element anymore, and you're trusting everyone to visit the newspaper's online page. And a lot of people just aren't getting their information anymore on the online newspaper or the printed newspaper. They're going to other places to get their news. So I think newspapers still, where they exist, some communities don't have them anymore. But where they exist, I do think they are still a channel that you want to push out that notification to, and that you might get a percentage of traffic, either to the obituary itself, if it's housed on your, funeral home website, or perhaps some visitors to the service, participants who find out about it through the newspaper, be it a print edition or the online edition. But I don't think you can rely on that as being like the primary driver. I think
Right.
it's community specific. Some communities still have a large newspaper presence and a strong newspaper. Many communities do not. And I also think that's a challenge also with the this new model that you're seeing, trying to deliver obits in some type of TV format, right? Because again, I think if you take 100 people off the street and ask them, well, what do you watch for TV? I don't think you're going to see a uniform customer in terms of saying like, oh, I have this cable package, and with this cable package comes my local news station. That doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
A lot of families, they have kids and lots of responsibilities. They might not watch a lot of TV, and they probably do watch TV, but maybe they have Amazon Prime, and they sort of watch some TV through Amazon and whatever comes through that, and it might not be their news channel that can deliver obits in some kind of like newscast, right? Other people might have Netflix, and that might be their TV. They don't, again, it might not come with some kind of local news station. Others use different streaming services. I mean, there's a zillion of them, right? There,
Mm-hmm.
so there's no uniformity anymore, even in our TV watching habits. If you are trying to sort of tout and advertise the whole idea of delivering obits in some kind of news channel format. And again, that's not to say that's a bad idea, but I just think it's not going to be the primary driver. You have to have your tentacles, so to speak, in all sorts of different baskets to drive that traffic to your obits and to drive awareness that someone has died. And that is a lot harder to navigate, right? I mean, I think for families, it would be a lot more simpler if it were just, oh, push it out in the newspaper or push it out in Facebook. Another company and I haven't heard much from them recently. But I thought it was a really cool idea when they started. Is Everdays, right, where they would
Mm-hmm.
actually
Invites.
find
Yeah.
all those contacts in someone's phone, like the phone of the deceased, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't just because you're the family member of someone that died, you don't know everyone that your loved one knew or had relationships with. So I thought that was a really cool idea where they would actually take the contacts from the uh, deceased's phone and send some type of notification or alert that person had died. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I haven't stayed up to date on where Everdays is, but I thought that was a cool idea.
Yeah, it
And I
was.
think when you combine all of those different sources, then you're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
But if you're a supplier trying to come up with a business model to to tout the fact that you can capture all those people, that's challenging because people are just in all those different places. And again, if you're a family member trying to let everyone know that hey, this person that we love and care about has died, again, it is also challenging. So I think you just have to be thinking about the primary places to be. And just like social networking, right? I think it's sort of similar, right? Just like social networking, there might there's probably like dozens of social networks out there, but ultimately you have to decide, you know, to keep yourself sane, where are the 2, 3, or 4 social networks where I need to be to get my message out? And I think, I think funeral homes, families, and suppliers, depending on what kind of business you're in, we should be thinking in the same terms, right? Where are the most important places to be it the newspaper, be it online, be it TV, and try to capture those, those markets, those segments. Realizing that we're not going to get 100%, but if we can maximize the use of our time and reach, I don't know, 80% of the people, and sort of trust that 80% to hopefully relay the message to the other 20% that we're missing. Um, I think that often happens. I think that's probably the best we're going to do.
Yeah. No, you made some really good points there. I think, the message for funeral homes maybe is the importance of a marketing mix, right? And a distribution when it comes to the obituary, knowing that if you've published it to your website, that's not enough, right? I mean, there's going to be the subscribers to your website. It's not a very big list typically. So it's like you've got to get it out to the customer. And to your point on the customer, like we don't go home and turn the news on anymore. I mean, how I can't tell you a lot outside of sports. Who watches live TV? It's all like like on demand. But like the other thing is, how often do we even search for news? We don't, because the news comes to us, right? I mean, the algorithms in everything. I mean, even just Google, right? Google is going to deliver you the most relevant news to you because it already knows what you're looking for, what you look at, what you slow down when it shows up on your feed. X is going to do the same thing. Anybody that's using Facebook and any other social network, they're experiencing that same sort of behavior. So it's like the news comes to you, and so if news has to go to them, you've got to get it out there. You've got to let the family know. Because I'm just thinking, like, with again back to my mom's, had I not shared it and proactively announced the family, right, then nothing, I don't think, really would have done that. And so many people wouldn't have known. And so it's like important to get the family involved, let them know the importance of publishing. And then it's also interesting. There's this, we just actually finished an integration with Bob Arrington's business, Obituary Share, where what they'll promote, like boost a post on Facebook based off of demographics that might matter to that person. And so they're out there proactively trying to get it into the feed of the people that it's going to matter to, because of just even just putting it on your funeral home's Facebook page, that might mean nothing, right? That might not get in front of anyone, because if you're just publishing obits, are people just flying right past them? And if so, then Facebook's not going to reward your content. So, yeah, I think you made a lot of really great points there. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think that's really it. The message out to funeral homes, like you've got to do what you can to distribute, and you need to let the family know the importance of distribution, because at the end of the day, you want more people in the funeral home and
Yeah, I'd
experiencing what
actually
you
be
can do.
interested, and you probably have more insights and data on this than I do, but I'd be interested to know how many funeral homes are boosting obituaries on Facebook. I know there's always an argument on whether or not to even post those obituaries on your funeral home page or not. And sometimes I run into people who say yes, other people say no, other people create some type of dedicated social media page only for obituaries. But if you are the family, knowing that most of the content we post on Facebook does not show up to our followers if it's not boosted, because Facebook has simply just become more of a pay to play model where, for your content to show up, you need to be boosting it. I wonder how funeral homes are approaching that, or how families would like them to approach it. Right. I mean, I don't know if there's the opportunity to, um, offer to boost a post with the obituary of a loved one, if the family wants that, right? If they are trying to spread the word about it,
Yeah.
why
I
not?
mean,
Why? What's preventing you from, you know, throwing $50 at an obituary to boost it, especially if you're passing on the cost to the family or including it in your charge to begin with, and doing it for every obituary. Um, it's something for people to think about. But again, I'm not sure if there is one right answer, knowing that there is this big argument and controversy over whether or not to post obits at all on your
on
Facebook
Facebook,
page.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I've heard the arguments on both sides too. We see that social is a huge traffic driver to the obituaries. So, um, I mean, I can't remember the top. I mean, it's a good chunk. I mean, it's like 30 or 40% of our traffic comes from social media. So whether that's the family posting or the funeral home, I don't quite know. But
And
in terms of who's posting or boosting it, not very many, I don't think. I mean, I think Bob's company does that. I've heard of one other, but I don't know that very many funeral homes are doing that themselves. Not that they couldn't, but
yeah, it's
yeah.
it's interesting because I know, and when I worked at printed newspapers, the obituary page was always said to be one of the most widely read pages in the newspaper. And you would think, if people are interested in the obits, they might look at other sections of the newspaper, right? One could say the same should apply for funeral homes. If you are, folks are visiting those obituary pages and are interested in seeing the obituaries, they would probably maybe gravitate to other sections of your page, of your website, right? Especially if you have a nicely designed site. And why not capture those people, um, that are interested in your obits? But
Right.
again, I know there's arguments on the other side that people who really strongly believe that, people that are following your page don't want to be overwhelmed, by obituary after obituary after obituary.
Yeah. Yeah. No, interesting subject though, for sure. Thanks for your thoughts on that. So let's get back to your story here. So what are like some of the accomplishments that you've been most proud of in your history in the death care space? And then, well, I'm gonna ask you that, but then let's let you answer that, and then we're gonna get back into like I want to talk about funeral vision and ring ring.
Sure. I mean, just speaking in general terms, again, I think I've just taken a business oriented approach in all my reporting. I've always tried to share both sides, and you know, sometimes that has resulted in not everyone being happy with me, but I've always been one of those folks who have thought, if everyone is happy with you, you're probably doing something wrong. It's okay if not everyone likes you. If people read, a sort of investigative piece or an analytical piece, and both sides are left feeling not quite satisfied, that probably means you did a pretty good job of telling both sides of the story. And so, there's been articles I've written throughout the years, of company A suing company B, non-compete disputes and, accusations of this or that. And I've always just tried to tell both sides of the story and have done my best to let the reader make up their mind, after having the facts shown to them. And that's the approach I've really always taken, as in my role and as a journalist serving the profession. Sadly, I mean, I think the media in general has not really followed that course the last 10 years. If you tune into television station A or television station B, I mean, you have a pretty good idea of which way they're slanting. And
Mm-hmm.
I've just always tried to take that middle of the road approach and not take sides, and try to just tell the facts as they are. Over the course of my career, I've covered some really cool stories. SCI buying Stewart Enterprises. Park Lawn buying Horan and McConaughey and Bowie. Lots of big acquisitions. Homesteaders getting involved and taking Park Lawn private. Writing about some titans of the profession that have passed and gone on. Those have always been really cool stories to write, because I almost feel like I'm paying tribute to some folks who just contributed a lot to the profession. Be it Tom Johnson or Todd Van Beck. These folks just contributed so much to the profession. So, I really thought it was I was honored to be able to write those articles, and then highlight all their accomplishments. Other things, I've been in this business a long time. So, when I started, holding something as simple as a webinar was like revolutionary, right? And, so I've been involved with that from the get-go, in terms of, starting webinars and having people attend and working on, sponsorship models to bring insights and information to the profession, and on-site events. Obviously, conventions and associations have been around for decades and decades. But, some of these smaller meetings, when I first started, it was not so typical for, someone to have a smaller meeting or a regional meeting if you weren't part of a big association. So, I worked hard at that. I've seen that model change a little bit as the years have gone by, especially as you've seen more online and virtual competition. I think events have gotten more challenging, but also, on-site events, if you can get 50 or 60 or 70 of the right people in the room, that is still just a home run. I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
it's harder and harder to get people out of the office and like actually go somewhere and try to learn and network. And so while that's become more challenging, I think it's become even more important and more rewarding when you can get it done.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I mean, I've found every one of those types of events I've been to, even in a small group, there's always some very valuable takeaways. So tell us how you went. How did we go from Kate's Boylston to Funeral Vision?
So yeah, I was at Kate's Boylston for 15 years and stayed on, for a few years after it transitioned to new ownership. It was interesting when I went through that process. I mean, at first the buyer didn't immediately step up, and I think toward the tail end of the process, I actually looked and I thought like, hey, why don't I buy this company? So when I finally decided to say like express my interest there, someone else had actually stepped up to the table. But I toward the tail end of the process, I actually had thought about that a little bit and thought like, it was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I began thinking in those terms, of like, hey, I could take out, $1 million or $2 million loan and pay it off with the cash flow of the business and be done paying it off after, 8 or 9 years and then have a business to run. And I think going through that whole process, even though I ultimately worked for the new owners for a couple of years, I think it just started making me think a little bit differently. And especially after covering so many interesting entrepreneurs throughout the years and whatnot, I started to think, geez, everyone, I've seen a lot of companies come and go. Some have failed, others have succeeded and done really well. And I just started to think more in those terms. I also just felt like I had accomplished everything I could accomplish really at Kate Boylston. I didn't think I could really earn any more money. Um, and I didn't think I really could get into the ownership game of it, which, I thought would be really cool just to, get some equity somewhere or,
Mm-hmm.
sort of approach something from that angle. Um, and I was getting to be of that age where it was time to try something else or just continue in that same role for years and years and years and hope that they didn't give me my walking papers someday or outsource my job to India. So, I just started poking around and ended up getting a job in like a quasi state government agency at a school boards association. And, I tried that and did that for a few years and, did something new in education. I was a manager of publications and really enjoyed the job. Um, but then after I was there for 3.5 years, and during that time, I started Funeral Vision as a side hustle. But at the end of that 3.5 years, just recently, actually, 2 or 3 months ago, um, my boss retired where I was, and I had a really good chemistry with her. Her retirement took me by surprise a little bit, and I found I didn't really have the same chemistry with the new person I was reporting to, and so it just felt right to dive back into funeral service all in full time, um, especially knowing that, with my boss retiring, I had built Funeral Vision and it had sort of hit a critical mass. It was showing, signs of perhaps, doing something really good, right? Like, it and I knew either I was going to have to focus more on the full-time job outside funeral service and, see that hard work maybe, go by the wayside a little bit and peter out, or I could, dive back into funeral service full time. So given those dynamics, I just did a lot of thinking and thought that it was time to make a change. And so um, I called Welton, who I've known for years, and I've always just gotten along with him really well. It's really important for me to like the people I work with, and to have a really good chemistry with them, because at the end of the day, um, why be miserable working, right?
Mm-hmm.
You I didn't want to be somewhere and be unhappy just for a paycheck, just because it paid me more money. I decided to pivot, and Welton was very gracious and pretty much offered me a spot, created a spot for me, you know, hours after I called them. I
Wow.
had maybe a 5 or 6 people on my list that I was thinking like, hey, maybe I can give this person a call or that person a call and try something else. But he just immediately offered me something, and I decided to go in that direction. And I'm not really sure what the future will bring, but I'm very appreciative that Welton is fully supportive of my efforts at Funeral Vision. He's all about educating the profession, keeping people informed, and sees it complementary to what he does at Ring Ring. And so, he is happy to let me keep doing that, and he knows I'm very passionate about it. But I'm also a full-time Ring Ring employee and helping him achieve his goals and objectives as well.
Yeah. So tell us about the role, like what the role at Ring Ring.
So, my title is a fancy sounding title, Vice President of Industry Insights and Content. And so it's a new position that he created for me. And I think we're figuring out the role as I go along. I'm really just a few weeks into the job, but I'll be helping out with a lot of, writing for, trade publications and funeral service, providing insights and analysis there. We are just launching a Ring newsletter for clients and as well as other people that might be on our list, prospective clients or people that we might have worked with throughout the years. And so, I'm working on a newsletter for them called Elevate. I think the first issue goes out a couple days from now. And
Cool.
folks will be able to sign up for that, at no charge, and get that as well. So, and it's not just marketing information, it's any kind of business information that might help funeral home owners navigate challenges. So it might be insights from quarterly earnings reports of publicly traded companies, to benchmark your business against theirs, and maybe learn from some of what they're doing. Different market opportunities and challenges and so forth. So I'm bringing some of my expertise and trying to help Ring's clients through that newsletter. There are different verticals that we're involved in as well. I mean, death care is still definitely our main focus, but we definitely see some symmetry between like the home care market, the hospice care market, and we think that as we learn more about those different segments, that it will help us operate better in the funeral service segment as well. So I'll certainly be, dedicating some of my time to helping out in those other verticals as well.
Cool. And do you plan to continue? I mean, it sounds like Funeral Vision Online is going to continue. You plan on continuing like your educational meetings and events
Yeah,
as well?
absolutely. In fact, I think the few days after I took the job at Ring, I booked a second event that Funeral Vision is hosting. It's called Tech Turbocharge. It's going to be December 11th in Baltimore, and just lining up speakers for that event. And we are holding Mastermind, Elevating Your Funeral Service Business to New Heights, on September 11th in Philadelphia. So those are funeralvision.com events, and I'm still charging ahead with them. Welton might be a speaker at both of those events, but we'll have other speakers as well. But he just brings some incredible expertise when it comes to marketing and SEO and Google Ads.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll be a great speaker for us. But yeah, I'm definitely continuing with holding events and trying to bring different voices and different experts to help funeral home owners and cemeterians. And, looking forward to doing that.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And I think we're all happy to hear that's continuing too. I mean, Funeral Vision is, you've built a great online publication that all of us, I think, pay attention to now. And it's really cool. So a couple more questions for you though. Just what, what do you hope to see happen in death care, or is there any like? I mean, as you've probably thought deeper about the industry than most folks do, and so I'm just curious, like what you think the future holds, and you know, yeah, if you were looking at a crystal ball from all of your
Yeah, well,
experience.
I mean, there's a couple trends I think that will continue. I think we will continue to see private equity involvement in this space, especially as we navigate, challenges and hiccups in the economy, uncertainty. Um, Investors and private equity rightfully see a stable business in death care. People are always going to continue to die, and people are always going to want to honor their loved ones. And the form of disposition might change, right? I mean, cremation keeps ticking up each year, but the desire to honor your dad or your mom, your grandfather, your grandma, your son, your daughter, that's never going to go away. And funeral homes, as long as they can remain a conduit and a supplier of those meaningful experiences, whatever the form of disposition might be, as long as they can design and hold those events and help families navigate those challenging times, funeral service is going to remain relevant. So private equity is going to continue to sort of see that as a steady ship. That so I also think we'll see consolidation continue, and what I hope will happen is that as consolidators acquire some of those higher performing independent firms, that they allow those firms to maintain and retain some of what makes them special, and not try to make everything so corporate cookie cutter. I always get jaded when I hear of consolidators buying a lot of firms, and then all of a sudden the budget becomes king, and all of a sudden those firms can't go to professional development opportunities, or they have their travel budget limited, so they can't go. They have to all of a sudden go to one convention instead of two conventions, and I think if you are if you're a consolidator, I just really encourage those consolidators to try to keep that focus on professional development and learning, and realize that those investments really do pay off, and also engages your employees, and keeps them on board, I think.
Yeah. No, really interesting insights. With your events, do you kind of tackle some of those situations, like especially like when you talk about the increase in cremation and trying to make sure they're planning events, like some of your masterminds or any of these? Do you kind of take any of those topics head on?
Well, at Mastermind, Chris Kruger with the Foresight Companies, he's one of our speakers, and he is gonna, he just provides some great advice on succession planning, and walks attendees through some of those issues, whether they be buyers or sellers. So, there's definitely certain things you can do to prepare your business for a sale, and put your house in order. And likewise, certain things that maybe you should be looking for if you're a buyer. And some things that you might not automatically think of. I mean, cultural fit can be a huge thing. Um, the business might be in the right area, might have the right metrics, but if you don't have the right cultural fit for your team members and how those two businesses coalesce, that's a big problem. So certainly those are some of those issues that I hope to focus on, and have the experts like Chris Kruger focus on at our events. And cremation mix, case count, pricing, all those types of things are very important if you're operating a business these days. You definitely, you can be making all your families happy. You can be having great market share, but if you're not charging correctly, you can suddenly see your business in trouble. So those are types of things that, as a business owner, you really need to be focusing on and paying attention to. It's challenging, but even tariffs, right? I mean, we all have to be concerned and focused on tariffs, regardless of what, political side of the fence you fall on. You need to know, how much is this going to be costing your business? What do you need to be charging families for it? How might that price change, perhaps rather suddenly, based on whatever happens in Washington? As a business owner, you need to really be thinking about these things.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because when you're thinking about, I mean, putting all that together, you're a funeral home, you're running a business that there's a lot of comparables to, right? There's a lot of other funeral homes, and a lot of other funeral homes that have sold and prepared themselves for sales, and have succeeded or not. And so it's really easy for a buyer really to come in and see the comps, right? Where like other, businesses are maybe are a little, they're not that way, where it's like, I mean, like what we do, there's only a few kind of really direct competitors. So it's interesting to think of that, why that's so important for a funeral home. So one other question is just in the back of my mind. I don't know if anything will come out of this, but has there been, in all these years of excellent journalism, has there been any articles? You mentioned some of the ones that you really enjoyed writing. Were there any that were just like really hard, or you felt like took some extra courage, or any articles that just felt like, man, this one was just like really a difficult project?
There was an article, a whole series of articles I wrote that some folks might remember out there, about a funeral director by the name of Henry Vincent out of Ohio, who had gotten in some previous trouble earlier in his life, involved in some illegal activities. And that was a challenging series to write. And I don't want to go into detail on it too much, but it definitely resulted in a lot of controversy and was a challenging series to write. And I will say Henry, appears to have gotten his life together and is a valuable contributor to the community these days. But it was one of those stories where, we made the call at the time that we thought the funeral profession had a right to know that someone with that background was involved in the profession. And, it was a challenging series to write. Definitely.
No, obviously, yeah. Still, just hearing you talk about it, you can tell there was a weight, right,
Yeah,
on you to do that.
Yeah, and it was one of those very challenging series, stories to write, where I was getting emails from the FBI about my reporting, and
Wow.
anytime you start getting emails from from attorneys and the FBI, and you're in the thick of it.
Yeah. Struck a chord.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, man, this has been really great. I appreciate you taking the time. It's cool to be on the other end of this, because normally you're the one asking all the questions. And any last words, or I guess I a lot of times I'll ask a question about anything about us that would surprise you, or hobbies or anything like that maybe would be interesting for others to know.
I mean, I just want to thank anyone watching out there in the profession, for embracing me into this profession. Everyone, like I said, everyone from the first year I joined and started reporting and trying to help funeral directors, navigate business challenges. They all just welcomed me, and nothing has changed since I began in this business, 20 some years ago. And it was the same when I launched Funeral Vision 2.5 years ago. I can, I can already say the business is profitable. It's not, it's still like an ancillary income. It's not anything I can just do and just rely on that sole income. But not every business can launch and still be around 2.5 years later and say like, hey, it's actually turning a profit and not in the red. And that's all because people have stepped up and advertised on the site. But more importantly, how I measure my success through Funeral Vision is not through the advertising dollars, but just by the number of people that say like, hey, I've heard of that site and I visit that site and I find reading that content meaningful. And, I've told friends about it and so forth. So I definitely think I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and maintaining the brand and trying to grow it. And hopefully as the years go by, it will become more and more of a force to be reckoned with and provide more value.
No, thank you for that. And I think all of us that are in the profession, I think hopefully we all recognize how blessed we are. It's a great industry to be a part of. But that being said, you have brought so much value to it. That's why you're so easily embraced by everyone. I think it's just all the content that you've brought. We all pay attention to it because we know that it is valuable. We know that you're thinking about it. We know that you're going to report on news quickly, and what you've done has been awesome, and a lot of us have benefited from that. Just even these 2.5. tons of benefit from you back in the Cates Boylston like days, but as well as now, like we were all very happy to see you come back, knowing that we were going to start benefiting from your valuable thoughts again. So thanks for what you've contributed to the profession. So.
No, and thanks for sharing your story too. If you're watching this, Funeral Vision has a really cool profile of Curtis Funk. So you can just search in the little search function on the site there, type in Curtis Funk, and you can read his really cool story. Beginning with how he cut classes in high school to work on a business that he started while still in high school, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. No, thank you for doing that. One of these days, I'm gonna have to swap the photo out on that page. I think that was right after baby number 2, and I had all that baby weight going. I feel like your wife's pregnant. It's like you get all kinds of excuses to eat treats. So anyway,
but truly, as a father, after hearing your story and writing about your story, it really did start to make me think of what we teach our kids, and hearing your story and how your parents sort of brought you up and how you were thinking in those business terms, even as a kid, really made me start thinking about what I teach my own kids, and how it's not always about like, do well on this test. You got to start thinking about entrepreneurship and maybe some other avenues. And, I guess some people would see what you did in high school and say, geez, you could take that approach. Why did he cut class? And why did he do that? Like, in some regards, you were probably, the perception from some people would be like, oh, you're a bad student and you're going nowhere. Totally. Whereas you really were just showing lots of ingenuity and you followed your own path, and look at you today. So hearing those types of stories throughout the years, have really helped encourage me to try to step out of my comfort zone and think of like, hey, how can I maybe do something else and not just be an employee? And, even working for Welton, right? I mean, I've shared his story a couple times as a journalist. He started his company and was working full time for several years before he went all in on Ring Ring. And look at him today. He has a company and he employs more than 130 people. And, he's one of the market leaders in funeral service in terms of digital marketing, if not the market leader. So, looking to folks like that, even though I'm getting up in years and, and pushing 50, I just try not to stop learning, and I'm trying to stretch out of my own comfort zone and hopefully, achieve some cool things in my middle age.
Yeah.
Because it's never too late, right?
Yeah. And I think it's a great point as a parent, like same, I watch my kids, and when they're like acting like out of line, like not doing what you expect them to do, it's like, it's easy to get frustrated. But I've been reminded a few times by people like my wife and family and friends and coworkers, where it's like, share some story. It's like, shouldn't you be celebrating that? Right. That like, kind of like what seems rebellious, because wasn't that who you were, but it's hard to see it that way sometimes. Like, you just want them to fall in line and kind of do what they're supposed to do. And, get up there on stage with the rest of your kindergarten class and sing the song, but or whatever it is, they don't want to do that. And we've had a first grader run away, and the police showed up to our house. And, one of my coworkers was like, "That's awesome." And I'm like, "Is it?" It's like, that was like, yeah, it's awesome. And I've heard someone else say, it's like the things about your kids that drive you crazy are the reasons they're going to be able to succeed as adults. And so I try to keep, because my kids are all small. I mean, the oldest is 7. So I try to keep that perspective, even though I was that kid that was so hard to raise, I'm sure, for my parents. But anyway, yeah. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay. Well, Tom, this has been awesome. Thanks again for your time. Thanks everyone that listened and does listen to PodCasket, where we tell the story of the legends of funeral service. And this has been an awesome opportunity to hear Tom Parmalee's story. We hope you'll listen to this and subscribe and listen to the next one as well.
All right. Thanks, Curtis. And